There is a very specific kind of emotional conflict that many people live with silently. On the surface, it looks confusing, even contradictory. These are individuals who deeply fear being alone, yet when closeness becomes possible, they begin to pull away. They crave relationships, but they also resist them. They long for connection, but something inside them whispers that staying distant is safer. This inner tension is not a flaw in character. It is a psychological pattern shaped by experience, protection, and emotional learning over time. To understand this pattern, we have to slow down and look beneath behavior into emotional memory. No one is born fearing intimacy or solitude. These responses are learned through early emotional environments. According to attachment theory developed by John Bowlby, the bonds we form in childhood with caregivers become the blueprint for how we relate to others in adulthood. When care is inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes unavailable, the nervous system learns to stay alert. Love becomes something unpredictable. Comfort becomes something uncertain. In such environments, a child may begin to develop a confusing internal message. I need closeness to feel safe, but closeness is not always safe. Over time, this creates a deep emotional split. One part of the psyche longs for attachment, reassurance, and belonging. Another part becomes defensive, preparing for disappointment before it arrives. This is where the adult pattern begins to take shape. As adults, these individuals often describe feeling lonely even when surrounded by others. They may spend long periods imagining connection, craving someone who truly understands them. Yet, when someone gets emotionally close, when texts become frequent, when expectations rise, when vulnerability is required, they begin to feel trapped, overwhelmed, or even irritated. What once felt comforting starts to feel suffocating. So they step back. They create distance. They convince themselves they are better off alone. But the loneliness does not disappear. It returns quietly, often at night or in moments of emotional exhaustion. And so the cycle continues, reaching for connection, then retreating from it, then feeling the ache of isolation again. Psychologically, this pattern is often linked to what researchers call disorganized or fearful avoidant attachment. While Mary Ainsworth expanded on Bowlby's work through her strange situation studies, later understanding of attachment highlighted that some individuals do not fit neatly into secure or anxious categories. Instead, they hold both desires simultaneously, the need for intimacy and the fear of it. This creates what feels like an internal push and pull. Imagine standing at the edge of a warm ocean on a cold day. You want to step in because you know it will feel good, but the moment your toes touch the water, your body remembers the cold wind behind you, so you step back. Then you miss the warmth. Then you step forward again. Emotionally, this is what relationships feel like for many people with this pattern. In daily life, this conflict can appear in subtle ways. A message from someone they care about may bring joy at first, followed quickly by anxiety. They may overthink how quickly to reply, how much enthusiasm to show, or whether they are becoming too available. If a partner expresses affection instead of feeling only warmth, they may also feel pressure to respond, to match energy, to maintain closeness. And pressure often activates withdrawal. At the same time, solitude brings its own emotional weight. When alone for too long, the mind begins to romanticize connection again. Memories of past relationships may resurface, not always accurately, but emotionally amplified. The mind forgets the discomfort and remembers the comfort. This selective memory deepens longing, so the person re-enters the idea of connection, sometimes even pursuing it again, restarting the cycle. To understand why this happens, we also need to understand the nervous system's role in emotional safety. When early relationships are unpredictable, the brain adapts by becoming highly sensitive to emotional shifts. Closeness can activate stress responses, not because intimacy is inherently unsafe, but because it was once paired with inconsistency or emotional pain. So adulthood relationships, even healthy ones, can unintentionally trigger old survival responses. From a psychological perspective, this is not indecision. It is protection. Carl Jung once spoke about the idea that what we resist often reveals what we unconsciously fear within ourselves. In this case, the fear is not just of being alone or being with others, it is the fear of emotional loss, dependency, and vulnerability. For some, being alone feels like control. Being in a relationship feels like risk. But over time, control becomes isolation, and isolation becomes emotional hunger. One of the most painful aspects of this pattern is self-judgment. Many people who experience it believe they are inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, or too complicated. They may even feel guilty for pulling away from people they genuinely care about. But this judgment only adds another layer of emotional conflict. Now, instead of just fearing closeness, they also fear their own reactions to closeness. In relationships, this can create confusion for both partners. One person may experience warmth and connection, while the other alternates between affection and distance. This inconsistency can lead to misunderstandings. The partner may think, "They do not care about me," when in reality, the emotional system is simply overwhelmed. The withdrawal is not rejection, it is regulation. Over time, if unaddressed, this cycle can reinforce itself. Failed relationships confirm the belief that closeness is unstable. Loneliness confirms the belief that connection is missing. The person ends up caught between two emotional truths that seem impossible to reconcile. But beneath this pattern lies something very important: capacity for deep emotional sensitivity. People who fear both loneliness and intimacy are often highly attuned to emotional nuance. They feel deeply, sometimes too deeply. Small shifts in tone, attention, or energy can be strongly felt. This sensitivity is not the problem, it is simply uncontained. Healing begins when the pattern is no longer seen as identity, but as adaptation. What was once learned for survival does not have to remain permanent. The nervous system can relearn safety through consistency, patience, and experiences that do not replicate past unpredictability. Slowly, closeness does not have to signal danger, and solitude does not have to mean abandonment. In practical life, this might begin in very small steps, allowing someone to stay emotionally close without immediately withdrawing, noticing the moment when anxiety appears in intimacy and choosing not to act on it immediately, sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it. These moments may feel subtle, but they are psychologically significant. They teach the brain that connection can be tolerated. At the same time, learning to be alone without emotional collapse is equally important. Not as punishment, but as presence. Eating a meal without distraction. Spending time without filling every silence. Learning that solitude can be neutral, not threatening. This slowly weakens the association between being alone and being unsafe. What makes this emotional pattern so complex is that it is not a lack of desire for love. It is an overload of competing emotional needs. One part says, "Come closer." Another says, "Step away." Both parts are trying to protect something valuable: the need for connection and the need for emotional safety. As this understanding deepens, self-compassion becomes essential, because the goal is not to eliminate one side of the conflict, but to integrate it. To recognize that wanting love and fearing it can exist in the same person without contradiction. And that healing is not about choosing one over the other, but about building enough internal safety so that both can exist without overwhelming the system. In time, relationships stop feeling like a threat to independence and start becoming something more balanced spaces where closeness does not erase individuality and solitude does not erase connection. The push and pull softens, not because the emotions disappear, but because they are finally understood. And in that understanding, something quietly changes. The person who once felt trapped between loneliness and intimacy begins to realize that both needs were never enemies. They were simply waiting for safety to coexist.